Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. So we got the dollar going higher and higher and higher. It broke a critical threshold today. We're going to go over that right now. Also, I'm going to give you my feedback on what on earth is going on with the LA fires and what are the economic ramifications going to be. And then we got to talk about globalization. With Trump being inaugurated just in a few days, we've got to ask ourselves, is deglobalization a good thing, a bad thing? It's all about trade-offs at the end of the day. It's a cost-benefit analysis. But maybe more importantly, is it even possible? We're going to go over that on this video right now. So first and foremost, let's get into what the dollar is doing, or should I say the dollar wrecking ball. Let's go right over to the DXY. Let me do my screen share. There we go. Okay, so this critical threshold that I pointed out, 110. So right now we're at 109.82. But as you can see throughout the day, we were over 110. So now let's go back and compare this to, let's see if we can look at a 3-year chart. So we are getting very close to the 3-year high. That was right around 113. So we're at, we crossed 105. We've crossed 110. Now, if we go up to 115, we're getting really close to 120. And personally, at 120, I think things, they might even start to break before then. Now, maybe it won't get up that high. Maybe it'll go back down to 105, take a breather, sell off a little bit. I mean, I'm sure it's overbought. And then we start to see the climb go back up close to, or maybe exceeding 120. Nothing goes up in a straight line, right? So we'll have to pay very close attention to this. So why? Well, you guys know from watching my videos, it's all about what this does to international economies. And therefore the global economy, therefore the global monetary system, therefore liquidity within the banking system itself. So let me give you an example of what I'm referring to here. We're going to go over to Bloomberg. And the Bank of Indonesia pledges rupiah, I believe that's their currency, defense after hot U.S. jobs number. So it's not really after hot jobs number, it's after the dollar it starts going towards 110. I mean, you could say the hot jobs number had to do with the increase in the dollar because long-term interest rates went up, and short-term, I think that affects it. We're looking at currency differential, interest rate differentials, but longer term, I think the fundamental drivers as to what's keeping the dollar above 105, and not just keeping it above 105, but having it continually go higher, getting close to where we saw it as far as its all-time high over the last 3 years, and then maybe exceeding that. I think it's really more so about the lack of liquidity, the lack of banks wanting to play ball globally, the lack of dollar liquidity, and a flight to safety at the end of the day. And even if the United States economy is doing well, even if that's your belief or your view, that's fine. But you've got to look at the rest of the global economies, the global developed economies, and they are doing extremely poorly. No one is going to debate that. I don't care how bullish you are in the United States. If I ask you how China's doing, you're going to admit that it's doing horribly. If I ask you about Germany, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, etc., or in this case, Indonesia or India, you're going to say those economies are contracting at the very least, regardless of what your view on the United States. And therefore, that's going to play into global liquidity because that means Eurodollar banks risk off. That means they're creating fewer dollars. More loans are being paid off than created. And then on net, that means supply of dollars goes down. That means the price or value of the dollar relative to other fiat currencies goes up. That means your dollar-denominated debt becomes more burdensome. And the input costs for the stuff you need, such as oil, such as commodities, like wheat, like soft commodities, food, that matters, right? Those become more expensive in your local currency. Okay, so you guys get it because I talk about that all the time. But now let's see how important this is. It's not just George Gammon saying this on the Rebel Capitalist channel or on a whiteboard video. You can see it. You can see it in the actions these central banks are taking. If the dollar wasn't a big deal, going to 110 or higher, you would not see the central banks freaking out like this and taking extreme measures. Key talking points. Their currency fell as much as 0.6% against the greenback on Monday, just today. That's a big move. Bank of Indonesia has promised to boldly guard its currency. Again, why? Why? It should just be a cross rate, right? Who cares if the dollar's at 110 versus 100 versus 90? I'm talking about the DXY, but who cares if the rupee or rupiah is falling against the dollar? Like, what difference does it make? Why should they care? Obviously, they do. And it's because of what we were talking about earlier, dollar denominated debt and input costs. And by the way, input costs, meaning food, if we have food insecurity, what does that do for the government? The more food insecurity, the more government political insecurity you have as well, because that's where people really draw the line. Once they can't put food on the table or a roof over their head, they go to the streets with the torches and pitchforks. And a dollar is a big component of that. Politicians, central banks, they understand this very well. Getting back to the article, the central bank continues to guard its currency stability. Now, by the way, how often does this work? Rarely ever. They try to, and ask Japan, right? They came out, what was it? I think we were at 150 or getting close to 160, and they came out and defended the currency, and it dropped all the way down to 150 or 140. Now, where are we? Let's just go over to CNBC really quick and see, just out of curiosity. So we go over to FX. We're at 157. Pretty much exactly, if my memory serves me right, where they intervened initially, let's just say, what was that, 6 months ago? And sure, temporarily that moves the needle, but then market forces take over and the currency goes right where it would have gone without the interventions to begin with. At the end of the day, it doesn't, you can say it 15 different ways. And whatever can happen short term, it's just noise. At the end of the day, the market can completely overwhelm any central bank, including the Federal Reserve. Let's get back to that article. So here you can see that it's getting to this dangerous level that it got to back in July. I'm sure they had some fallout from that, which is why once it's got to this level again, they're hitting the panic button. So they're saying that the blowout in U.S. non-farm payroll, okay, not really. We're looking at interest rates along into the curve. That's giving the short-term interest rate differential. That's what's hammering emerging market currencies. But it's not just emerging market currencies. I mean, let's be honest, it's hammering the euro. It's hammering everything. Here's a quote. We are in the market to ensure the balance of foreign exchange supply and demand to maintain market confidence. Good luck with that one, my friend. Sounds like a central banker. The central bank is set to announce its policy rate. The only thing that would be worse right now for the Indonesian central bank is if they came out, excuse me, and started blaming this on speculators. Once they start blaming things on speculators, you know they're done. Like, they're done. You can time these things very easily. That as soon as you hear those words, you know that they are toast. It's just a matter of time. Let's get it back to this here. The dollar has had a strong start to the year as traders reassess the pace of Federal Reserve rate cuts and weigh up the likely impact of tariffs. You know, look, there's so many things that go into the dollar cross rate. I mean, there's literally millions of variables, but I do believe that the expectations for tariffs, the higher for longer, long end of the curve going up, I think these all play into it. But I think though that's short-term noise. I think the signal is really lack of dollar liquidity, risk off, and global contraction, global economic contraction. Okay, so now let's get over to kind of the mainstream view here. And for that, I like to go to Yahoo because that's kind of who they cater to. Is just the mainstream retail investor. Let's see what they're saying about this dollar move. They say U.S. dollar has surged into the new year. Its rapid rise could test corporate earnings with big bank retailers. So obviously, this is a more U.S. centric type of view, which is again, I think they're off sides here, because even if you are looking at this as an American, how does it impact the U.S.? You've got to start with global dollar liquidity. You can't start with, oh, what does this do to American manufacturers because the dollar is going up, making them less competitive? I mean, yeah, that's a part of it, but you're you're missing the forest for the trees right there, my friend. Getting back to it. This increase in dispersion of earnings per share. Okay, so this is how they're looking at it. They're saying stronger dollar is likely to add to a recurring phenomenon into earnings season. Punchline here: higher dollar is going to put downward pressure on corporate profits because it makes their products less desirable on a global scale because they become more expensive relative to the competitors. Getting back to the article, in other words, a strong U.S. dollar will adversely impact companies that do most of their business overseas, like consumer goods and household products, as it will lead to slower earnings growth over time. This typically drives a wider range of performance outcomes across index during reporting season. Okay, so this guy Wilson, he's just talking about it through, and again, I don't think that's the big story. I think that's a sub component, but I don't think that's what we should really be focusing on, even if you're an American investor, because the global liquidity dwarfs whatever happens with corporate earnings. Because trust me, you turn off that global dollar liquidity tap, and I can assure you, corporate earnings are going to plummet, even if the dollar is going down, making their goods and services more attractive relative to other of their competitors who are selling things in currencies where their expenses are denominated in things like the British pound, Canadian dollar, Swedish krona, etc. Okay, so after hitting a September low, the U.S. dollar index, which measures dollar value, and yeah, dollar, did they not even include the euro? Come on, Yahoo. Look at this. Am I reading this right? After hitting a September low, the U.S. dollar index, which measures the dollar's value relative to a basket of 6 foreign currencies. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry there. I didn't see the euro because I didn't have it capitalized, so my eye just glanced right over it. Okay. It's like 53% euro. That's why I was saying that. So bottom line is dollar is ripping higher against all of these major currencies. And Trump's proposed policies. Here's another kind of economic fallacy, in my view. They think that the higher tariffs will lead to a stronger dollar. Why is that? Because they think that the higher tariffs are going to decrease the trade deficit. And therefore, if there's a lower trade deficit, then fewer dollars will be leaving the United States, and then less supply of dollars outside the U.S. And what that means to the banking system, lower dollar liquidity. This, I don't think, really holds any weight. Why? I mean, just look at trade deficits and then see if you can find some correlation with the dollar. This goes all the way back to the 80s. In the 80s, there was this view that the twin deficits, I'm sure you've heard that many times, and that would be the budget deficit and the trade deficit, really impact the value of the dollar relative to other currencies. That was back in the 80s when we didn't have as much information. Now we've got a lot of data over the last, let's just say, 20, 30 years that completely disproves that shows that there's really no correlation whatsoever. Why is that? Because these Eurodollar banks can create as much dollar liquidity as they want. They don't need dollars from the United States to create their own dollars. Now, just because they can create dollar liquidity doesn't mean they will create dollar liquidity. So what does it have? What's a much, much, much bigger component, or what's a much, much bigger driver of dollar liquidity than dollars just leaving the United States? It's risk. It's risk. Because if risk is low, it doesn't matter how many dollars are leaving or coming, from the United States. There's going to be plenty of dollar liquidity because, again, those Eurodollar banks can create it on their own. But if risk is high, it doesn't matter how many dollars are leaving. You're going to have a liquidity problem because no matter how many dollars are leaving through the trade deficit, it's not really going to move the needle as far as the global monetary system. I mean, it's just math. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, let's just say that our trade deficit goes from $1 trillion a year down to 500 billion. Okay, we're talking about a $500 billion difference in a global economy that's 130 trillion. And by the way, 75, 80 trillion of that is denominated in dollars. So that's, you see what I'm saying? It's like pissing in the ocean and thinking that you're actually making a big difference there. No, actually you're not. So whether you pee or you don't pee in the ocean doesn't care. So that's basically what we're looking at. And that's why you don't really see a correlation between the trade deficit and the dollar relative to other currencies. It's the size and it's the fact that these banks can create as much dollar liquidity as they want, regardless of how many dollars are coming or going from the US. It all revolves around risk. All right, getting back to it. Looking ahead, the critical questions are to what extent these moves will be validated by incoming data. Okay, then they just go back to this nonsense about this impacting U.S. corporations. This is very similar to the view that the mortgage crisis is what caused the GFC. It's like, not really. That was a little teeny weeny component of it. That might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. But again, that is missing the forest for the trees. Okay, now what I'd like to do is move over. Where are we, Josh? We are, oh yeah. Well, first of all, let's get over to the, what's happening. I mean, you guys have followed this story, I'm sure. I just wanted to add a little editorial and try to look at this through the lens of economics. And what I'm referring to specifically are the LA fires. I mean, just a complete tragedy. And obviously your thoughts and prayers go out to all the people that are impacted by these fires. But then you have to step back and say, how did this happen? I think it was like a perfect storm, no pun intended. I don't think you can point at one individual problem. I think it was just, you had 20 of these things converge and just happen at the exact same time, which led to what we have seen there. And unfortunately, it's not over. I've got friends in LA that are just saying it's like a sci-fi movie. It's crazy. The first thing that came to my mind from a standpoint of economics was just simply, how do you rebuild? How or can you? Because although many of these homes might have had fire insurance, I don't think the fire insurance covers the complete cost of rebuilding. And by the way, if this happened to you, would you rebuild? Like let's just say for a moment you had a house that was valued at $1 million and you've got fire insurance that's going to cover 500,000. Well, what's your cost to rebuild? I mean, is it going to be higher than the value of the property originally? Maybe. I mean, costs have shot up, but let's just say it's the exact same. So you'd have to have 500,000 out of pocket to rebuild. But then the question becomes, how much is fire insurance going to be moving forward? So let's say on that $1 million home, you had $500,000 worth of coverage, because that's the maximum amount they would cover for, because these insurance companies, this goes back to how this was just an aggregate of all these bad ideas, bad policies, combined with 100-mile-per-hour winds coming out of the east as opposed to the west, and all these things converge and create this this disaster. But one of the issues there is that the government came in and said, oh, you can't charge people too much for fire insurance because we're going to stand up and protect the consumer. Great idea. So if you're an insurance carrier, what do? You're like, well, all right, we're either going to back out completely because this doesn't make any sense because we're going to lose money on providing insurance and we're not a charity. Or what they're going to do is they say, okay, we'll provide insurance, but to keep the rates low based on this crazy government law, we're going to go ahead and we're only going to insure up to half the value of the property. And then I think the California government came in and subsidized the rest through their kind of government provided insurance program, which last time I checked had about 220 million in it. And so far the damages that they would be on the hook for would be 6 or 7 billion. So they're completely bankrupt, as you would imagine. This is how the governments operate. But the government just made the problem worse and worse and worse and worse. So bottom line there, we go back to that guy who has the $1 million property that now, let's just say his fire insurance is going to be 20 grand a year. And let's just say it was 5 grand a year. So now you've got to make a decision. Do you want to take 500,000 out of pocket? Do you even have the 500,000 to rebuild? And then once you do rebuild, and by the way, what do you think the rest of the neighborhood's going to look like? Because what if your neighbors don't rebuild? And then you just got this house in some war zone. I mean, there's a lot going on here as far as the decision-making process. But even if you do take the 500,000 out of pocket to rebuild, then, okay, your fire insurance is going to go from, let's say, I don't know, $5,000 a year to $20,000. Are you going to want to fork that over? Maybe, or maybe you just move to Nevada. Maybe you just move to Vegas. There's a lot going on here. So now let's get into this Wall Street Journal article and try to read kind of what's happening right now. What's that going to do to purchasing power? What's that going to do to the net worth, unfortunately, of a lot of these individuals that got caught up in this complete tragedy at really no fault of their own? Okay, so let's get into it here. And I know this is a kind of a human story, and I want to be sympathetic to that. But I also want to try to look at this through the lens of economics, because that's what we do on this channel. Okay, so Los Angeles, we got Sylvia and her husband, Bob, bought their 3-bedroom home nestled in the foothills for $780 in 2009 at the start of the year. It was worth more than double that, 1.6. This is another thing. I mean, a lot of these people had their entire net worth in their house. On Wednesday, raging wildfires, basically burnt the house down. We get it. That made up roughly 80% of the family's overall wealth. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, this is their retirement. Towering flames. Okay, we get it. They say it was their retirement. There's another person saying that their home equity was their retirement. Now these middle-class homeowners facing a crushing housing crunch. Los Angeles was already experiencing acute shortage of homes. It's real estate prices. Yeah, this might decrease demand a little bit, though. I mean, if you were thinking about buying a home in LA, let's say 3 months ago, you might be reconsidering that now. I sure would be. I mean, they're looking at this as though demand was very, very high, supply was low, and demand is just going to be the same. Therefore, supply going even lower means higher prices for those homes that still are standing. Yeah, I think I think we might be missing a little bit of the psychology that's happening right now. I mean, there's 66,000 people, it said, just in this one, just between these two neighborhoods that are impacted. I wish they had the statistics on how many people actually have insurance. And to what extent the insurance companies are covering this, because I'm almost positive they're not covering the whole balance or the whole value of the property to rebuild it. And that's if the people had fire insurance to begin with. Here we go. In 1998, Jim, who ran a plumbing business, muscled their way into Pacific Palisades when they bought what Josie said was the cheapest house in the neighborhood. It was $455,000. Recently, it was valued at $3.7 million. Jeez. They said they came from nothing. On Thursday, Josie, 77, stood in front of the home, now unrecognizable plot of rubble. Twisted metal searching. Jeez. I'm not going to read that next part. That's just really sad. Man. She wants to rebuild, but she's starting to tally up the cost. She said was initially told insurance would cover $800,000. Good luck. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You think 800,000 is going to rebuild that house? Not even close. In fact, I was listening to a podcast where they were going over the costs, and they said it's going to be at least $1,000 a square foot. So how big was her place here? My guess is it's bigger than 800 square feet. And let's just say it was 1,500 square feet. That's a minimum of 1.5 million to rebuild. I mean, she might be able to rebuild the garage. She said initially it was told insurance would cover 800 to rebuild and 12,000 a month to rent, I guess, during the process of rebuilding. She said she can afford her $2,200 mortgage payment. Yeah. So how does this impact the banks? Because think about that. Is she going to keep making her mortgage payment? It's not like that goes away. Just because the house isn't there doesn't mean your loan caught on fire. I mean, in order to rebuild, so let's think about this. She would have to come out of pocket $700,000 at a minimum to rebuild. That's going to take 2 or 3, and that's if you can even get the permits, because that's another issue that we have here is building in California is notoriously impossible. And I mean, just to remodel, it might take you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years just to get a permit. And a lot of these places, I think, is monitored by some coastal, I forgot what the name of the bureaucracy or the government agency is. It's the Coastal Commission, something like that. And they are infamous for taking literally decades to give a permit. So, I mean, assuming this gal could rebuild in 2 or 3 years is extremely optimistic. She might not even have the permits by then. But meanwhile, she's having to pay her mortgage payment, even though she doesn't have a house to live in. Plus, she's got $700,000 out of pocket. And oh, by the way, where's she going to get that? When I think we were reading that 80% of her net worth was tied up in the house. So where's she going to get the 700? Let's just assume that she can get it. I mean, the math doesn't work due to the time frame. And then what is she going to do? She's just going to sell the lot for how much? And then, by the way, where's she going to live? There's no way she can still live in California, or at least not here. And then, what does she do to the mortgage payment? Let's just say that she's got another 10 years on that. What is she just going to keep paying it? Of course not. I mean, she's likely going to default on that. And then that goes back to the bank. And now they get the property, the whatever, the piece of land that they're going to fire sell, no pun intended, to get their money back. I mean, fortunately, they bought it so cheap. She probably didn't owe much. Wow, that's the house. Jeez. Well, let's hear what she's saying here. This scares me rebuilding my house. She said 800 is a lot of money if you live in Iowa, but I'm going to build my home in Palisades again. How far is that money going to go? It ain't going to go that far, I can assure you. Bidding wars are breaking out for leases in some of the remaining coveted areas. Huh. I'm not really following that. I think another topic of discussion is what is this going to do to politics in California? And this is where, I mean, this is such a tragedy. I hate to point out anything that's optimistic, but you know, maybe, just maybe, there's something that's positive that can come out of this long term, because a lot of these people that own these homes, as I'm sure you guys have heard on the news, are celebrities, and they've got a lot of influence. Now, most of these celebrities have no experience interacting with the government, none. And if they did, they probably wouldn't be liberal, would they? So I'm curious if a lot of these celebrities try to rebuild and then they have to work with the Coastal Commission or whatever it is, this might be kind of their epiphany moment. They need to wake up and say, wait a minute here. Maybe maybe government in general is inefficient, because my experience, I've been trying to get a permit for 5 years and I haven't been able to do it. This is complete insanity. And maybe this opens up their eyes and finally they realize how detrimental government is to not just, building a property, but society at large. And then maybe this changes their opinion on California politics. And who knows, maybe this can be used as a catalyst to get the politics back to the middle and away from the complete insanity that we have seen for the last, let's just say, 20 years, that has just completely, in my view, ruined what was the most incredible state in the US. Okay, so now they're going over just more of the human tragedy here. Let's get back to a couple other stories they had. So again, I want to focus on look at this, talking about economics. He poured 27 million into his Malibu mansion. Now nothing remains. Los Angeles braces for resurgent wind as wildfire death toll rises. So it's not over yet. It's not over. And by the way, if you're an insurance company, you're going to go back in and provide insurance for these people? See, that's another thing. What if the insurance companies don't even want to play ball anymore and they say, nope, we're done. And then you're going to rebuild your $27 million mansion if you can't get fire insurance? Maybe if you're a billionaire, but maybe not. And then what does that do to the overall economy of California? And again, is that something that makes people just realize that, hey, maybe we need to go a little bit different direction as far as the political landscape? I'm curious what people are saying in the chat about the LA stuff. A lot of it was DEI. I mean, you guys I don't need to talk about that. You guys get it. I think the gal that ran the fire department was very competent if you look at her track record. But her view of just hiring, more diversity, more diversity, more diversity, I don't know how that pertained to the fires. Again, I know there's just so many factors that went into it. It's impossible to isolate just one thing. But but I'll go ahead and leave that one alone because I think you guys have probably heard plenty of stories on that. Now let's get into the deglobalization. That's more on topic for this channel. And this is fascinating because so many people are just pro deglobalization. They want to bring everything back to the United States. And I get it. I totally get it. But to me, what we have to do is we have to recognize that everything is a trade-off. And I can sit there and list 100 benefits to bringing the jobs or reshoring or deglobalizing, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. Absolutely, I get it. You can go over all of these reasons as to why it would be a positive, why it would be a benefit. But the analysis can't end there. We also have to go over the negative, the costs to doing this, and if it's even possible. Because we like to think manufacturing all of this stuff that, oh, well, we just flip this light switch and all of a sudden these global supply chains can come right back to the United States. We'll just go ahead and flip that light switch and all of a sudden all these factories that we need will just magically appear, and all of the workers we need will be right here in the United States. And there's no skill set that a worker would need that someone or everyone in the United States doesn't have. On top of that, we also assume that just flipping that light switch, that everyone, all these Americans, are going to want these jobs. Maybe, maybe not. Josh, how old are you? I can answer that question. Josh is 22. Looks like he's MIA right now. Josh is 22. Josh, there he is. Josh, how many friends do you have?
A few.
He says a few.
I'm not sure.
How many of your friends that are 22 or in their early 20s, late teens, how many of them dream of having a manufacturing job where they're just sitting on an assembly line for the next 65 years of their life?
Not many that I can think of.
Yeah, I think that number would probably be 0. Now, how many of them want to be a YouTuber?
Probably quite a few.
How many of them want to create content or be a crypto investor or any of these?
Yeah, that
probably
would be just about all of them.
Okay, so 99% want to be a YouTuber, content creator, Instagram. They want to get rich investing in fart coin and crypto and whatnot. And 0% of them want a good old-fashioned manufacturing job where, again, they're sitting on an assembly line just putting a cog in a widget for the next 60 years or 40 years or whatever it is, right? It's something we got to think about. And my point is there's trade-offs, and these are things that we have to actually think through if we want to do a proper analysis. We can't just completely oversimplify it and say, oh my gosh, yes, we need to have 5,000% tariffs because that's going to bring all these jobs back to the United States, and that's what we want. We want American jobs. That's admirable. That is. But we have to go through the trade-offs there, right? So let's look at this article from Bloomberg. And, oh, no, that's the dollar. Here we are. Is deglobalization even possible? So protecting national interests is now in vogue. That's an understatement. And they talk about how Trump is going to be inaugurated just very, very soon here, a few days. And if he comes out with this USA, America first, that's great. But what does that actually mean in practice, right? And is it even realistic that we bring this manufacturing back to the United States, even if we do have these additional incentives, let's say whether it's through taxes, tariffs, etc. So there was once a widespread notion that the tides of globalization were as immutable as the weather. Globalization is not something that we can hold off or turn off. It is an economic equivalent of force of nature like wind or water. This is Bill Clinton in 2000. Tony Blair, another guy I'm not too fond of, but let's listen to his quote. I hear people say we have to stop and debate globalization. You might as well debate whether autumn should follow summer. They're not debating this in China or India. They're seizing its possibilities. Now, I know a lot of people in the chat are going to make arguments about national security and all these things. And look, those are great arguments. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. All I'm saying is there's trade-offs. We have to acknowledge there's trade-offs, and very few people do. Either you're in the no tariff camp and all you're doing is pointing out the negatives, or you're in the yay tariffs, yay deglobalization, yay American jobs, and all you do is point out the positives. See, neither of these are very good. And my point is, you got to have both. You got to have both. And very few people I see land right in the middle and actually look at this objectively, admitting that there are no solutions, as Thomas Sowell says, there are only trade-offs. Let's get back to the article here. Moderates have suffered significant political defeats in Canada, France, UK, while the German government chancellor, Social Democrat, fell outright, paving the way for elections in February. I don't know that all of this is a result of globalization, though. I think it's more so a result of, other things that are happening there around free speech and the economy. And, I don't know Germany as an example. I don't think the German people are really against globalization because it's literally what their economy revolves around. Without globalization, they got problems. So I don't know if we can blame Olaf Scholz getting the boot on a drive for deglobalization. Over the past 40 years, economic growth in China soared as markets opened to the country's products. 800 million Chinese citizens escaped poverty. The impact of developed nations was much harsher. Again, was it? Was it? See, this is where we're just focusing on jobs, which we have to acknowledge, of course. But did we lose manufacturing jobs that none of Josh's friends want to China? Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a cost. But what was the benefit? See, then we get cheaper goods, and it costs you a lot less to shop at Walmart, Home Depot, Target. And we had disinflation from the 1980s. That's not the only reason, but that was a big component of it. And remember, at the end of the day, what is wealth? Is it income? Is it dollars? Is it gold? Is it Bitcoin? Absolutely not. It's goods and services. So by definition, the more goods and services a country, a society has access to, the richer that society is going to be. So I get it. All these jobs left. And that is definitely a negative that we need to acknowledge and think about. But the trade-off was we had more goods and services, or at least more goods, right? So on net balance, is it a negative or a positive? I'll let you be the judge. But what this video is about is just acknowledging that a thorough analysis needs to include the good and the bad. Let's get back to it here. They say clearly the narrative was faulty. They're talking about globalization and the benefits. Globalization didn't fall in our lap from the sky. We made it, and we could remake it or unmake it. Again, maybe. I would ask Josh's friends if you can bring manufacturing back to the United States, though. And at what cost? Right? I mean, that would be great for the United States to be completely self-sufficient. Who wouldn't want that? At what cost? Right? Is that worth the prices of the stuff you buy at Walmart, Home Depot, and everywhere else going up by 100% or 75%? You say, yeah, George, but everyone would have more money. Okay, again, is more money wealth, or is more goods and services wealth? And then if you think we can produce the exact same amount of stuff here in China, or here as they did in China, just using them as an example, I would go back to the human resources. I would go back to the foreign direct investment. And I would go back to how long is that going to take? Because again, even if we could do this, we have to understand that this won't come to fruition, meaning having just the exact same amount of goods and services we have now. That won't happen for, let's say, 5 years at the very earliest. That might not happen for a decade. So for the next decade, are you okay with the United States having a lot fewer goods and services? Which, by the way, means that purchasing power, I don't care what incomes are doing, purchasing power is going to go down even more than it has over the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe, but that's a cost that we have to consider, along with the benefit that we're going to have some manufacturing jobs come back to the U.S. and we potentially are going to be more self-sufficient in 10 years. But getting back to this, we are now in the age of deglobalization, countries prioritizing their national interests over global good. But, and again, were we ever prioritizing over global good? I see this completely derails for me, because look, it's not as though we had globalization just because all of us turned out to be altruistic and we just felt so sorry for these poor people in China that we wanted to bring them out of poverty. So we just shipped all of our manufacturing jobs over there. Said nobody. The reason we globalized to begin with is because we saw a benefit. We got cheaper stuff, right? It wasn't because we were doing charity for the Chinese, which is what this article is making out to sound like. The volume of global merchandise trade was up 3.3% through the third quarter of 2024 from the same period earlier. Well, that has a lot to do with the cerveza sickness and just these crazy governments just shutting down the entire global economy, including the domestic economies. In many industries, you'd never know globalization is supposedly in retreat. I'm not a big fan of deglobalization or the word. And this is according to Karen Harris, managing director of Macro Trends Group. While there's certainly a drive to be as dependent on unreliable partners, or to be less dependent on unreliable partners, national security issues, China and the U.S. are pursuing the aspects of the global economy. Okay. These complicated dynamics have put proponents of globalization in an awkward spot. Not really. And then she talks about World Economic Forum, which will hold as if the World Economic Forum, look, they might be a proponent of globalization, but that's not the globalization I'm talking about. What I am talking about is just free markets, just free market capitalism. And I know the pushback that I'm going to get there is, oh, George, you're living in a fantasy world because we don't have a free market. And therefore, in order to compete against these other countries, we have to make our economy less of a free market. In order to compete with these other countries, since we don't have a free market globally, then we need to have more government. We need to have more government intervention. We need to have more taxes, which is exactly what tariffs are, right? And let's not forget that we had tariffs way back in the 1800s and the early 1900s before we had the Fed. And that was like 85% of the revenue that went to the federal government. But if I remember correctly, we got rid of those tariffs. Why did we do that? Because there was so much corruption that resulted from those tariffs that we wanted to get rid of them in favor of an income tax. And it was a regressive tax because it disproportionately impacted the poor and middle class. That's why we got rid of it back in the 1900s prior to the Fed. So you're telling me, and again, I'm not here saying that on net, these tariffs and deglobalization is a negative. I'm just pointing out both sides of the argument here so you can come to your own conclusion. Everyone knows the positive story because you hear it in the mainstream media just constantly, nonstop. That's why I'm trying to that's why I'm trying to bring up the other trade-offs, right? So let's go back to that. If we implement, let's just assume that history was correct, and the reason they got rid of tariffs to begin with was because it created so much corruption within the government. And by the way, that was when the government was only 5% of GDP. How much corruption do you think tariffs would cost now when government spending is 50% of GDP? Woo, boy. If it was bad back then, you ain't seen nothing yet. But also, it's a regressive tax. They knew it back then. Why? Because it increases the cost of stuff for the poor and middle class, and a larger portion of their paycheck goes to buy the stuff that increases in cost. That's why it's a regressive tax. So if it happened back then, do you think that somehow magically it's not going to happen today? Of course it will. That's a cost. But again, we have to weigh those costs with the benefits. And it could be a net positive, or it could be a net negative. Let's see. They've got, oh no, this is just some other articles. What I want to do is switch up the screen share because there's nobody that can explain this as well as Milton Friedman. As you guys know, he's one of my favorites. He and Thomas Sowell, I think, are probably tied. And Friedman did a very famous video, or used a very famous example of a pencil. Now, this is a pen, of course. But the way he describes the process of building a pencil shows you or illustrates some of the things that I believe are missing in this debate of deglobalization versus globalizations. In other words, a free market, right? And again, to think that the United States can't compete unless we just make Chinese goods suck more, I think that you're not giving American entrepreneurs enough credit. I think we absolutely can. But I was having this discussion the other night. My view, I'll just throw it out there, is that, look, right now, you've got American companies competing with Chinese companies, right? So let's just say the lower my hand goes, the more competitive you are. So the Chinese companies have been more and more competitive for all of these, they're not playing by the free market rules and they're manipulating their currency and all these things. Okay, right. But it's not as though they have a free market, and it's not as though doing business in China is easy. Let's remember they're a communist country. So therefore, that's a negative. That's a drag on their entrepreneurs. And here in the United States, we don't have that type of drag, even though we don't have, although we do, but let's just say that we don't have the currency manipulation benefit, right? So what the argument is right now is let's create tariffs on Chinese goods so we make them less competitive. In other words, we make them suck more. As opposed to, hey, let's outcompete China by making our companies better. That's our advantage. And how do we make them better? By reducing regulations, red tape, bureaucracy, all of these things. If you did that, if you asked, as an example, one of these CEOs for a United States manufacturing company, hey, would you rather have us just do tariffs on China, or would you rather have us slash your regulations by 75%? Which would give you a more competitive advantage? I can almost assure you 95% of them are going to say take down the regulations. You take down the regulations, and I don't care what China is doing to their currency, we're going to beat them. We are going to beat them. All right. So anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand here. Josh, let's switch up this screen share. And I want to play this video of Milton Friedman because no one can say it as well as he can. And the reason I'm doing this is just to remind everyone of what globalization has done for the increase of goods and services we have access to. And I know I've stated this 1,000 times, but it's worth stating again. This is not to persuade you that deglobalization is bad. It's just so you incorporate this into your analysis and incorporate this into the trade-offs, into the cost-benefit analysis. And if you could still come to the conclusion that deglobalization is a net positive, fantastic, fantastic. But at least your analysis is complete. Josh, do you see this? We'll assume that we do, and then I'm going to go ahead. Actually, let's see if I can. Yeah, I can see that. Very good. Okay, let's get back to it here. And I'm going to assume that you can hear the audio. Josh, if you can't hear the audio, just let me know. But here we go.
The basic principles underlying the free market, as Adam Smith taught them to his students in this university, are really very simple. Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
IBKR Desktop is on its way to becoming the ultimate trading platform.
Whoops. So I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, all you have to do is ask yourself right now, or even within the next 5 years, could we create a pencil in the United States? Where would we get the rubber? You think that let's just say that we could somehow source that. You think the environmentalists are going to allow that? Let's just say that you think we mine graphite? Maybe, but maybe not. Most likely, the vast majority of the components of those pencils, even to this day, we would have to import because we simply don't have them in the United States. And even if we did have them, it would be politically impossible to get them out of the ground. And then that assumes that we have people with the expertise to put those components together, get them in the same place, and actually put that pencil together. And then at what cost? How much is that pencil going to cost you when you go to buy it at Walmart? Answer, a hell of a lot more. And that's assuming that we can even source the materials in the United States. And that's a pencil. How about an iPhone? Good luck with that one. How about this camera I'm talking into? How about this microphone? How about the food that you get? You think we could source all the food that you have in the grocery store in the United States? Good luck getting bananas. I don't see too many banana farms in the United States, do we? We don't have too many of them. You see what I'm saying? This is the part of the argument that nobody really discusses because we get into the nuance and we get into the complexity. But unfortunately, reality deals in the realm of complexity, where theory oversimplifies. And the problem with just living in the world of theory and feeling good about all these jobs coming back to the United States is you just never think through how this will play out in practice. And therefore, doing a proper cost-benefit analysis and looking at the actual trade-offs. So you guys get it. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you guys know my position on this. I think on net balance, it's a negative. But I'm not sitting here saying that if you think it's a positive, that you're stupid, that you're dumb, that you don't get it. No. I'm not saying that at all. All I am doing, my intent with this video is just to make sure that you are looking. And by the way, even with people, if you agree with me, I'm still trying to make sure that you're not just hammering on the negatives, that you're acknowledging the positives. And those people that think it's a net positive, I'm just trying to get you to acknowledge the negatives. And by the way, not just with deglobalization. I'm trying to get you to do that with everything. Realizing what Thomas Sowell has always said, that there are no solutions. You guys know the rest of it. There are only trade-offs. All right, guys, on that bombshell, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. You got to check out Rebel Capitalist Live. Oh, Josh, by the way, should we tell them about what we're doing for my birthday?
You got to tell them.
I think we should tell them. I think we should tell them. So in case you guys didn't know, my birthday is January 30th. And so what I am doing for my birthday is we're doing a virtual conference that includes Joseph Wang, Kenny McElroy, Brent Johnson, Chris McIntosh, and we might even add a few more. And the best part of this virtual conference is it's free of charge. Free of charge. So if you guys want to RSVP and get the link for this free virtual conference we're doing on my birthday, it's going to be 5 o'clock Eastern time. You can go to, I think, georgegammon.com/birthday. Is that it, Josh? Here we go. georgegammon.com, it's virtual conference. I think if you go to birthday, it comes up as well. So you guys can try either or. And here you go. George Gammon's birthday virtual conference. Here's a speaker lineup we have right now. And you guys just sign up. Just put in your email list, or excuse me, you just put in your email, and that helps me grow my email list. And then you'll get the link to actually attend. And if you can't attend live, keep in mind that that link will give you access to the recording. So definitely check that out. This is a virtual conference you are not going to want to miss. And as always, guys, make sure you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll see you in the next video.